We should start with the Nuggets because I think I didn't see a lot of this, but I saw and heard some of it in the aftermath that there are people that were genuinely shocked they didn't win the series. And yeah, when you juxtapose it against they blew a 20-point lead in the second half, I get it.
Mm-hmm.
But like Minnesota's been there all year. I was asked on a show I did just before this if this like signals a changing of the guard. And it's kind of like there was a changing of the guard at the top of the West already, and it included the Timberwolves this season. Like the Nuggets were there, but they kind of rose to because they won the championship. We knew they were relevant, but they won the title last year. But like we moved away from kind of this Warriors and who does LeBron play for our talk, and it's Thunder, the Mavericks. We kind of thought they were like in it and then fading out, but now they're back in it. I mean, talk about being wrong about the Mavericks. Not related to what we're talking about at the moment, but it's not a changing of the guard. Like the Timberwolves were right there. And I think that curious your thoughts on that, but I also just think the better team won this series, and the team that was built to be the Denver Nuggets' foil by the guy who also built the Denver Nuggets. They ended up being the Denver Nuggets' foil. And that to me, more than anything, is what I take away from this series.
I think the changing of the guard idea, I mean, in some ways, yeah, like Anthony Edwards is in a conference finals. Like for everybody that, it has been talking about face of the league next Jordan, all this other stuff, like, yeah, that tracks, I guess. But that presumes that Denver is not going to be part of that elite, class in the West or like shortlist title contenders next year, which I don't think is the case. I think Denver, like this ties to, yeah, Minnesota earned it for sure. But like, if this is a 14 game series, we play 7 more, like this might just be 7-7. Like, I think we saw it's hard to get past, Denver kind of lost it at the end because they did blow the 58-38 lead and scored 32 points, I think, basically in the second half. So it's easy to fall into the same thinking we did after games 1 and 2, where the Wolves jumped them. But then there were 3 point, 6 games in between that where Denver was the better team. So like, I think, yeah, new teams have risen into the contender class, Minnesota being one of them, which was there all year. Same with OKC, same with Dallas, I guess now. Mm-hmm. But Denver's not going anywhere. We can talk about what may change for the Nuggets or like just what may get prohibitively expensive. But like, there's no scenario where Denver is not, I don't know, one of the 4-5, best odds, 20-25 title winning teams next year when we go into the season. Like, so it just, again, I'll get back to what I said initially of like, I can't kill Denver. Like it did look rough at the end when the Wolves were just on this run that seemed so improbable, but like, I don't know, for half of that series, basically Denver was the team that was dominating and it just came out, slightly less than half, I guess we should say. But yeah, like, and I kind of feel that way for different reasons. Like the don't panic for Denver, I have the same don't panic for New York and the same don't panic for OKC, but for different reasons we can get into there specifically. Does that track for you? Or is it more like, oh, the Wolves are now a team that we should just regard as clearly a cut above Denver going into next year? Or it's just like, yeah, they're going to fight it out again. I hope we get another series.
I think it's more likely that we would get this series in the conference finals next year than that this somehow signaled that, okay, the West is there's no longer a debate as to who the top of the West is. And by the way, there could just be other teams that enter that, we'll still have to go through the Mavericks. They were built to beat the Nuggets, which is why it's kind of fascinating to see, well, how do they match up against the Mavericks? Like Dallas, I mean, we were clearly wrong about them. They might still have other moves up their sleeve. And so like, you can kind of say like Phoenix is done if you think like they might win a bunch of games, but they're not a real threat. Ditto for the Warriors, maybe even the Lakers, but like the Kings still have assets to play. The Pelicans have cards to play. Their Thunder are just floating around out here. So it's not time for Denver to panic. With that being said, like this is and I don't know how much of an indictment it is on how they went about their offseason, but they clearly, based on who was playing by the end, you leaned too far into I'm not going to call it the 2 timeline model, but and I respected what they were trying to do in the sense of, we want to hit on these guys because we're about to get mega expensive. And if we want to keep this core together, we need to hit on some cost controlled players. But by the end of that series, it was Christian Brown. Okay, you hit on him, but we knew that last year. Peyton Watson not playing this series basically, and you having to hit the Justin Holiday button who played well for you. It's concerning, but to say that they leaned too far into it, you have to acknowledge, well, what was the alternative? They didn't have money to spend. Do you think that they could have done better than Reggie Jackson with the mini MLE? Maybe, but who was the most impactful mini MLE signing this year? It was like you had guys on minimums hitting harder, like a Kelly Oubre Jr., who really wouldn't have done much for this team anyway. And so there's that element to it. The other one is, though, we could also acknowledge Jamal Murray's calf wasn't right. And that created this variance in his performance that, yeah, he was good enough for them to win game 7. He hit very big shots against the Lakers in the first round as well. And there's always been variance to his performance, but it was more turbulent this year than most. So that's I think a reasonable excuse. But when you look at kind of the way in which they ended up losing, where it was their offense that kind of failed them, and it was just, I know it's just the Wolves, but like when you have a team that can disrupt how you want to run Jokic and Murray together, and then really just disrupt even Jokic, who can still have these great games, but how much credit do you ascribe to the Wolves for, kind of like going after Michael, not even going after, but like Michael Porter Jr. has a horrid series for him, single digits in the final 4 games. I think he scored. He apologized after the game to his team and felt like if he played better, they would have won. I mean, he's right, but like it doesn't just fall on his shoulders. And so you could look at this as, if Murray's healthier, if Michael Porter Jr. hits shots, and I know, what do you have, 9 boards in game 7, but there was like 2 issues where just Naz Reid comes in and like he didn't even like have him on his radar, like comes flying in from the corner for that putback dunk in game 7. There was issues with a bunch of people in this one. So I think you can look at the Nuggets and say they might just be back here next year and they might be better than the Timberwolves. I'll throw the thing I'll note, though, is you have to get to a point where you have more than 6 guys that you trust.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they get there. Look, KCP has a player option. And if you, with his cap hold, which is like 22 plus million right now, they're about $10 million into the super tax. Hat tip Keith Smith of Spotrac for coining that. I don't think he gets 22 million, but even if he just picks up his player option there, and maybe they extend him off that number and that's how they save some money in the short term, but they're in the super tax. And I'm assuming they'll pay it for at least 1 year, but how do you get better aside from internal development? And that might be like, you have Reggie Jackson. I assume he'll pick up his player option. That's a little over 5 million. Zeke Najee's extension kicks in. That helps you from a salary matching perspective, but oh, hey, you can't aggregate salaries. And so Zeke Najee being your best trade chip at 8.9 million on an extension that, look, he gets 3 fully, or is it 4? Yeah, it's 4 guaranteed years because he has that player option for 27, 28. There aren't going to be teams that he didn't do anything for you this year. So even if you were willing to attach I think they can trade their 2031 draft pick, or even if you're willing to attach, you can't even attach a player. And so that's what gets super challenging. You have to believe that this core is it, and you're going to get enough internal development from Peyton Watson on offense, from Julian Strawther. I know he got injured in the middle of the year and that kind of shook him up, but are you going to trust Jalen Pickett next year to handle some backup point guard minutes? Oh, by the way, you have the Aaron Gordon at the 5 button still, but you kind of still need a backup big who isn't DeAndre Jordan or Zeke Naji at this point, I would argue. And if you want to make a meaningful change, who's getting traded? It's not going to be Jokic. I don't think it's going to be Murray. I don't really think it can be Gordon. Now you're looking at Michael Porter Jr. trades. That still seems like an overreaction, though, to how this season ended.
Yeah, everything kind of does, right? Because like normally in this situation, if this, so hanging over every piece of Nuggets analysis we'll do, whether it's got to do with the series that was just completed or what they need to do to improve themselves in the offseason, is colored by the fact that we're making those assessments based on how they looked against like maybe the best playoff defense we've seen in like 15 years or like, I don't know what. You almost can't get too hyperbolic about how good defensively Minnesota was. Obviously in this series, but all season, just far and away the best. Like
that second half of game 7 specifically, though.
And not just like, oh, they're athletic and young and big. It's like, no, they really excelled at like, let's make Jokic shoot 10 threes. Like that's what we want him to do. And we'll wear him out because anytime he touches it inside the 3-point line, we send 2. And so now he's tired. So when we leave him to shoot those threes, he's exhausted. That's hard. Like, it wasn't just a physical advantage. Like this was a ton of talent deployed really intelligently. So like, yeah, it would be great if Michael Porter Jr. could like do a little more with the ball so that he's not just someone that you close out to. And as long as he doesn't get a 3 up, like success for the defense. Sure. That'd be great. Like if some of the young guys were a little readier, like Peyton Watson basically not playing, I got to believe almost any other opponent other than Minnesota, he would have played. Like you couldn't put him out there against a defense that good, I think. So all those things are just of a part of a larger package where it's like, you got to get KCP back and you got to get a little more from Christian Brown and a little more from Watson. And maybe one of the other, guys from the batch of young players that kind of count as a second timeline, but are also kind of like, if KCP leaves insurance, like Strother, Pickett, Hunter Tyson, like all these guys, maybe one of them can give you 15 minutes or 10 minutes in a playoff game by next year. And so if you're Denver, it's just like, sometimes it's impossible to be like far and away the title favorite. And the best you can ever expect to do is to like be in that mix, which Denver very much is. And with any improvement at all is at the top of that mix next year. So it's just like, it's really hard to evaluate kind of soberly just because that Minnesota defense was so good. And you can't like maybe it'll be there next year. Maybe it will be as good, but maybe not. And like, if it's 98% as good, maybe Denver wins the next time they play a playoff series.
Although, what if Jaden McDaniels is 98% better on offense? We've seen it.
Sure.
We saw it towards the end of that series.
I mean, it could go either way. Like, we could be back here next year and Minnesota has taken a step forward and Denver is the same or slightly worse. And that's a 6-game series or a 5-game series or something. But yeah, like it feels to me, just because I just mentioned Strother and Pickett and all those guys, like they feel like they weren't supposed to help this year, but they were supposed to be hypothetically ready, if you're planning this far out, for the possibility of losing Caldwell-Pope, I think, or for Reggie Jackson declining his option and leaving. And suddenly like you just need that like backup point guard spot to be filled by someone cheap.
And I was going to ask you, I agree with what you just said. And the Peyton Watson thing, if you're looking for something to find unsettling, you could say, okay, well, it's only against the Timberwolves. And well, guess what? Like, that is probably one of if we're looking ahead to next season right now, we need to go through free agency, the draft, trades, yada, yada, yada. That's one of the 2 or 3 teams that Denver is going to need to go through.
Sure.
Anyway, like that, the primary teams are going to need to go through. I think where it would be time, and this would flip a bunch of our analysis on its head, is if they decide that they can't, and it's not an issue of can't, it would be an issue of what I'm about to say is won't pay KCP. Mm-hmm. And that's when it's, okay, now you just lost 2 of your top 6 guys from that initial title. Bruce Brown, you couldn't pay. I don't think I saw anyone frame it as they could. You couldn't. We'll move on. Look at that. But like, if you don't, I know he had a rough offensive playoffs. He was second team all defense for me this year, and I think he deserved it. He's 31. His best days are probably behind him. He's too important to what you're doing now. And I think we've now proven, unless you're just going to get a monster offensive leap from Peyton Watson next year. But I even look at Christian Brown now. You still need stuff from him offensively, specifically 3-point shooting. You can't just insert. By the way, Christian Brown, I was a believer in him last year. Rickety points this season offensively. I'm just after this Timberwolves series. He was probably their best Anthony Edwards defender. I know Aaron Gordon did nice work on him.
He's going to have a role, like no matter if his offense doesn't change at all, he's going to have that same role or a bigger one going forward.
But you can't, I'm not at the point where I could say, well, you put him in for KCP.
No,
and it's we're kind of like you nudged him up the pecking order and you were fine for Bruce Brown. This would go one too far. They're just not ready for it yet. And I don't know how bringing back KCP at least gives them more time to plan around like this. Oh, if they decide they need to get cheaper, that they can't afford these guys. But even when you go that route, this is actually my actual question to you. Is there ever room, or should there be room? Should they have already made more room to see if Michael Porter Jr. can do more offensively because of what you just mentioned, where you're talking about, by the way, by the end of this series, it was, even if Michael Porter Jr. was taking a 3, it was kind of a win for the team. But like, for him to do more where he goes up against these lanky and physical defenses, and like, if you bump him off the 3-point line or he's not open, there's only so much that he can reasonably do. And do they need someone more who can punish mismatches in the post or operate more off the dribble? And then the twofold question off of that is, should you make room for Michael Porter Jr. to do that during the regular season next year? But also, 2, like, do you even want him shouldering that type of load? Because with that, does it increase his exposure to back issues, where if he's trying to bang in the post or just take these guys more off the dribble and follow through on all of his drives? Or if you're also going to task him with doing some playmaking, not only is there the extra physical toll, but you're going to have to deal with some turnovers there, buddies.
Yeah, I think it feels like a lot to ask, but because of what we've just spent time talking about, where it's like, I mean, it's more likely to me that they lose KCP, then they bring in like a level of player that, because they just can't, that's at KCP's level or higher. I think most likely they will just keep him and pay what it costs and deal with it. But if you had to choose between, are they going to lose him or bring somebody else in like that is as valuable as KCP? It sort of has to be the former, because they don't have the ability to bring in someone. So anyway, that's not the Porter question. It's fascinating because like he would have to be, the thing with the Nuggets is they had until this series been able to like get to what they wanted to, which is just a heavy dose of Jokic and Murray when they really needed to score. And so like, yeah, to your point, like, I don't know if you want to take away from those reps because you're giving Porter Jr. like more chances, I guess, or just giving him a bigger share of the offense. But like, I guess, yeah, if you're going to play a good enough defense that can actually take away the effectiveness of some of Jokic's game and some of Murray's game, you do just need it to come from somewhere else. And I think of the other three starters, like it's definitely not KCP. It's not Gordon, unless like in terms of like, can you score against like a defense that has overloaded to Jokic and Murray? It sort of has to be Porter Jr. I don't even know what that looks like, because he's not someone that's going to like run a second side pick and roll, with any regularity. It's going to have to be like a fake, drive the closeout, either finish at the rim or make the next pass for an open three, which again, like Denver was pretty happy. I mean, Minnesota was pretty happy giving up threes as long as you weren't getting anything close. So like, I guess like, yeah, because we're banking on organic growth, like as the Nuggets' best way to improve, guys like Porter Jr. do have to add like 5% more, as an off the dribble scorer or something like that, because where else is it going to come from? You can't say, oh, Jokic needs to be better. It's like, he's as good as a human can be. And like Murray, yeah, more consistency would be great, but I don't know how to evaluate that given the calf injury.
And I think for people that are probably maybe, and I will say I'm maybe slightly uncomfortable with kind of where the Nuggets go from here, because now you're so dependent on internal development. But the fact that maybe they understood this or decided this before we thought they needed to be that dependent bodes well for them. But if you're looking to actually overreact or be more like, our analysis boils down to the Nuggets are just going to be right back here next year and they need to be incrementally better somehow. That's not spicy. The spiciness could come. I think there's probably like 3 or 4 flashbulb potential developments. We already mentioned one, the KCP free agency. Now, the extension eligibility, this is 2 for Aaron Gordon and Jamal Murray. If like you don't even hear whispers that those talks are happening, probably specifically with Murray, just because he becomes a free agent after next year. I think that's the last year of his contract. He'll be unrestricted. That would be the one where it's okay, what is going on here? And then the other one, well, and I don't think if they don't extend either of them, like maybe there's just some, but like the Murray one is probably a bigger one than the Gordon, just from how committed are you to continuing to pay for this core? And then, so that's 3 of those. And then the final one would also be, if you start to hear talk of Michael Porter Jr. trades, and the returns that you're hearing are like, oh, there are these teams that have cap space or out of it, like traded player exceptions, and there's draft equity being rumored, that's when you get worried. If they, like, I would even be a little bit worried if they decided that they wanted to break him up into like 2 or 3 players, just because, well, what does that say about your faith in your internal development? But like, if you start like hearing those whispers, that's when you start getting concerned, because it means, oh, they just watched this guy, but they just got punked by the guy that they could have kept. Good for Tim Connolly. And if you're Stan Kroenke and you're looking at this, like, I think as a competitor, I'd be like, well, I need to prove that, like, yeah, they won a title without him already, but it was with Tim Connolly's roster infrastructure. You should double down and spend more. But if they go into like cost cutting mode, or even just sniffing around it, this isn't the level of they were able to save money and get KCP. There will not be a move out there that makes me feel the same way about this. And so if you're looking to overreact to the Nuggets and their future, I just don't think you could do it right now. But those are the things I would be monitoring to see if this team is tilting in a direction that it should not be.
And of those options that you laid out, I think an MPJ trade has to register as the most like, I don't know about most, I guess most likely, and sort of the cleanest way to get maybe better without organic growth. Like, just because think of if MPJ is going to be in this role, which is like a limited role, right? Like, he's nowhere close to your best defender. You don't need him as like, oh, we got to have his length on this guy. And on offense, he's no higher than 3rd in the pecking order. And given like the amount of facilitation Aaron Gordon has to do, maybe 4th. So like you really could split him into two guys, one of which is like, I don't know, 80%, 85% of the offensive player just in that role of like a catch and shoot guy. And then someone that can defend. Like, I don't know. There's ways to go there if you split him.
And it would be semi-interesting if I didn't think that the shooting that Michael Porter Jr. provides is, I think, more valuable to this team than people realize, because the Nuggets, I'll die on this hill, they didn't shoot particularly well during the playoffs from three. Like, they don't take enough threes. And I understand that a lot of that is just like, look at how they're generating their offense. Do they need to? But like, when you're talking about like making up a variance, where it's just like, if you see the Timberwolves, like when they were kind of up by 7 inside 2 minutes, I know Denver's offense is Denver's offense, but it was just like, oh, it's over.
Yeah.
And then certainly when they go up 10 with 3 minutes, you're just like, it's over. And because they're just not a team that really goes to 3-point volume that way. And Michael Porter Jr. at least gives you that idea. And how are you getting a player who replicates that while then also deepening your rotation? I agree with you that the cleanest way to deepen your rotation of proven players would be to trade Michael Porter Jr. But you also get into the issue of, well, are you trading him? I don't want to say at the nadir of his value, but for less than he means to you, because you just perfectly outlaid his role and how it's limited. Who's looking at his salary and saying, well, I want to pay him max money without knowing whether he can actually do much more? He's their number 3.5 option, you call him. Are we in a position to pay max money for that when we don't know if he could do more, or even just to put him in the same role? And so that, like, you get into weird territory with that, which is why I'm just, at this point, you're kind of married to it's not the two timelines, but you're married to your internal development. And so I'm like, you run back your core 5 and hope that you get enough breaks offensively from Christian Brown and from Peyton Watson. Maybe Strother or Pickett can come in and give you minutes next year. Maybe Hunter Tyson can do something, but like, you're kind of, and could you hit on a minimum? I had thrown out the idea, I actually wrote about it, is I know his Philly homecoming was cool, but like, if you wanted to go ring chasing and you're willing to sign for them, like Kyle Lowry would be fantastic for this team. I don't think he solves everything, but it's like, that's someone else who could give you different layers of offense, even at his age right now. Who are they going to hit on? And like, but maybe that we're talking about them getting incrementally better or deeper. You could feasibly do that just by signing the right minimum guy.
Yeah. And it's like, at the end of it, this is not an uncommon position for a champion, a past champion to be in, where it's like, now, because you cannot get here without being expensive, basically, with very few exceptions. And so now it's just like, we need 1 or 2 guys to hit that haven't contributed yet. And that's not the most unlikely outcome in the world. It's like, I keep thinking back to some of those Spurs teams where it's like, they never went back to back. They'd get there, they'd win it. They'd come close or not that close sometimes the following year. And then, 2 years later, they'd win it again. And it might've been because like Tony Parker took a step, or like they suddenly got Danny Green, or they, just whatever it is, like
what's the motto?
George Hill mattered this time, or
we
like
love Danny Green. What do you say all the time? Sorry. I'm trying to quote you. We love Danny Green around here.
We do. Everybody loves Danny Green. Or just so it's weirdly, like, there's a blueprint here for the Nuggets, and the Spurs pulled it off for like 15 years, where you just kind of try to stay as close to this good as you can. And it's going to look a little different on the margins for a while, but you've got the main piece in Jokic, and you can just like, hope 1 or 2 guys pop. So you get a second rounder somewhere and he turns into a guy that can give you 20 minutes, and like, you're just there. So again, this is all circling back to like, I can't panic here. I can't do it because they're so good still.
And you saying the Spurs made me think of this. And then I have a question for you to wrap it up. I think that's maybe a different podcast, but the observation here is, how did they win their first title? By not overreacting to these postseason failures. And I don't know if you saw the Michael Malone quote. I thought he phrased it perfectly. Failure is not fatal. It's like, you could be pissed that they blew the 20-point lead, but they also lost to a team that the Timberwolves were better than the Nuggets. Like, that's just, we can say it now. They were at least in the discussion beforehand. So you got to this point by not overreacting. Why are you going to overreact now when there's nothing you look at, when, again, the core 5 specific, like your starting lineup, and saying there's no reason. What is the reason that they could not be back here next year aside from injuries? Do you see regression coming from anyone aside from KCP? And probably not.
No.